some people refer to this current movement as woke.
Yeah.
So the way I would define it is as an illiberal, authoritarian, identitarian, left-wing ideology. The illiberal comes because the goal is to shut down other people's speech rather than to just make your argument and contend with other people's arguments.
Hi, I'm Audrey Unverferth. I'm the communications manager for UATX, and I'm sitting here with Dorian Abbot, a professor of geophysics at the University of Chicago, a university I graduated from in 2022. And I'm really excited to chat with him today. We're sitting in Dallas in a beautiful library right now. Dorian is teaching for UATX's second year of forbidden courses. Hey Dorian, it's great to have you here. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Thanks, I'm excited too.
I wanted to start with kind of a curveball question, asking you what your thoughts are on the statement, "I believe in science." As someone who teaches science and is a scientist, what do you think of that statement?
I guess I guess my thoughts on the statement, "I believe in science," are sort of, it's not appropriate to use as a cudgel to shut down conversations. That's not really how the scientific method is supposed to work. From a personal perspective, I believe that the scientific method is an excellent way to obtain facts and data about the physical world. And those facts and data can be combined in technology to improve the lives of humans. And so I believe that the scientific method is useful. That's how I would say it. So yeah, I guess that's enough.
Awesome. And I'm interested in learning more about your background. Like, when did you first know that you wanted to be a professor, that you wanted to study geophysics? So
I grew up in Maine, and my uncle was an engineer and my grandfather was an inventor.
Cool.
He mostly invented nautical equipment, scientific nautical equipment, but later on he got interested in medical equipment.
Okay.
And so he retired.
Wow.
When I was born, he was about 49, and he retired only a few years later. And sold his company. But then he kept inventing things, and then he would develop it to a patent and then sell it. And so he would it was like usually about a 5-year process. So it was kind of like a PhD. And then he would pick a new topic. So he stayed interested, and he had a lab in his basement. And I would always go, poke around with him and learn stuff. And then they both were interested in sailing and fishing, and I would go with them, and they would teach me about waves and weather and things like that. So I was kind of interested in earth science. And then I was just good at math and physics. And so I was kind of looking for something at an intersection. And probably when I was between the ages of 10 and 12, I decided I wanted to be a professor at a big research university.
Wow, that young.
Then I just worked for that the rest of the time. And I got tenure when I was 33. So it was about 20 years of work. And then, and that was kind of a single-minded focus during that period.
Yeah.
And then since then, my interests have expanded a bit. I mean, throughout that time, I was interested in history and languages and a little bit philosophy and things like that. But after that, I guess I had more time to explore other things. And now I have a child, so I have less time.
Right. Well, and I'm interested to know, by the time you became a professor, after working so hard for it and thinking about it for years, was it what you thought it would be? Is it what you thought it would be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not what it was 20 years ago.
Right.
Things have definitely changed. But when I got tenure was actually around when things started to get a bit cuckoo.
Okay.
Pretty much around the same time.
Yeah.
And so things have slid downhill, I would say, since I got tenure. But hopefully it's not a permanent slide. I mean, my plan is, so I like to make long-term plans, like I just described. But my current long-term plan, I have mental and physical plan for the age of 80.
Okay.
So at the age of 80, I want to be on the faculty, able to write a coherent scientific paper. And to teach classes. Those are my mental plans. And my physical plans do 10 push-ups and walk for 5 miles without resting.
That's awesome.
And
That's awesome.
Anyways, I think on that time
Yeah.
scale, a lot of these issues are going to be resolved. We're just in a difficult patch.
Okay. Good. I hope so. And you're working really hard to try and help us get out of this difficult patch. I mean, you've done a ton of writing, helping with UChicago Free, really being a leader there. I wonder if you can talk about some of your initiatives to combat the craziness.
So, I mean, I guess we should define the craziness. The craziness is a deviation from the idea that a university should be pursuing truth, and that a university is a community of scholars. And as a community of scholars, it can't take official positions on any social or political issue. It has to maintain the space for each individual scholar to carve out their own opinions. And so that's the conception that I'm happy with. And we've deviated from that, I think, for a variety of reasons that I don't necessarily want to speculate about because I'm not an expert on that. But the current state empirically is that there's a large contingent of the faculty who believes that a significant component of our mission is something related to what they define as social justice, where I'm not 100% comfortable with that term, social justice, used in that context, but that's how it's being used.
Right.
So that's one problem. And then also thinks that the university should be taking statements, making political statements and social statements consistent with their social and political views, and that people who disagree should not be welcome. And this is often sort of rolled out through programs that are called DEI. And so that's kind of the situation that I'm not happy about. And one component of that is that merit, academic merit, current and future promise, is often underemphasized at the expense of other considerations related to the so-called social justice. And so those are the things that I'm concerned about. And so we started this group, UChicago Free. The other main person behind it is Harold Uleg, an economist, but there's a lot of faculty from across the university in it. There's about 50 faculty. And we have a couple goals. The most important goal, so it's a non-political group. It's just faculty who support the idea that the university should not make statements on social and political issues, which is contained in the Calvin Report, and that we should allow freedom of expression, which is described in the Chicago Principles. And so that's all we do. We have a listserv where we discuss these issues. So there's a lot of debate about exactly what's a social and political issue and exactly what's the university taking a position on it. We try to discuss those, and then we try to get statements taken down if they are made. And so we lobbied the president and provost about that for a long time. And finally, we got a mechanism to take these statements down. So the statements exploded, I should say, in 2020.
Yeah.
And then after the genie was out of the bottle, they just statements on everything kept coming up.
Right.
And so we've got a mechanism set up. We've met 3 times with the provost, 2 with the old provost, 1 with the new. And we have a person in the provost office that we report these to, and they do get taken down. We have some complaints about the process because it takes often up to a year to get them taken down. So they just stay on the website for that period. But anyways, we have gotten all the ones we reported eventually were taken down. So that's a main function of this group. And then the other function is that there are a number of elected positions within the university, elected by the faculty. And we try to encourage members of the group to run for them and then vote for those people so that there's some representation of this viewpoint. And the idea of this, where it came from, was just studying the tactics being used by the other side and thinking about what tactics were effective and what ethically we feel we could adopt. And so I think everybody in that group agrees that some of the threats and cancellations and things would not be, and deplatforming would not be ethical strategies to adopt. Right. But organizing and voting and advocating we felt would be ethical. So some of the strategies used by the other side would be ethical. And so that's what we've tried to do. We've been successful at getting people elected to the Council of the University Senate, which is a group of 51 faculty elected by the entire tenure track faculty and tenured faculty. And then there's 7 of those people are elected by the council to the committee of the council that meets bi-weekly with the president and provost. And so I was elected onto that this year. And that's a place where you can really air issues that are important to you. And so I just got elected to that, so I'll be on it next year.
That's awesome.
So that's good.
That's awesome.
And then the other thing I've been doing that isn't strictly associated with UChicago Free, but it's related, is I've been reporting violations of Title VI and Title IX. And so Title VI says that if an institution receives federal funding, you can't discriminate. They can't discriminate on the basis of race. And Title IX says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. So UChicago regularly has programs that are restricted to certain sex or certain races. And so I report those to the Title IX office. They're also extremely slow.
Okay.
The majority of the ones I've reported, they've taken down, not all of them. They've discontinued the programs. But it takes a year or more.
Wow. Wow.
And that's associated with someone named Mark Perry, who's doing this nationally. He has a national drive to basically to have federal law enforced. And it's a civil rights issue to have every citizen treated equally.
Right, to prevent racism.
Exactly.
It's a civil rights issue.
Sexism, yeah. And so that's the other thing I've been involved with locally. And then I also, when I first tried to advocate for these issues, my first thought was I would advocate internally.
Right.
And that was unsuccessful. And then I thought I would advocate openly to the department, not just like to the department chair and a few other faculty.
Right.
And that was when first time I got in trouble. And then I decided that the group that is responsible for this sort of putsch in the universities is not amenable to reason. And they're not open to arguments where you explain why the position is wrong and maybe they move their position. So it's just a waste of time. And so that's why I started writing op-eds and going on podcasts and things like that, because I think it's really important to get the message out there to the public of what's actually going on in a lot of universities. And hopefully that will put some pressure through the political process that will help resolve some of these issues.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's so much. And as a recent grad from the University of Chicago, I can say how much your work and the work of your allies helped me, and I think inspired so many others, because one success that I would add to what you've just outlined is that you have found a way to convince your peers to organize. And that's something that I think is so lacking. Without sacrificing your principles, you found a way to come together and push back in the public sphere. And that's what's necessary, because as you say, reason doesn't work oftentimes. It's all about power dynamics. And I wonder if you have advice for others about, how did you recruit faculty to UChicago Free? How have you found allies as you've been writing op-eds and speaking out? Yeah,
so I guess it's a delicate thing. I don't know if I can really give advice. Everyone has different risk tolerances. And, I'm a tenured faculty member at the University of Chicago, so I'm in a relatively more safe position. Now, tenured faculty at other places have lost their jobs under pretext, but it's still safer than other positions people could be in. I also have a disagreeable personality type, which I would say is, I think the psychologists have chosen the wrong term. I would call it a value-oriented personality type rather than a people-pleasing oriented. But the term they use is disagreeable. And so I'm comfortable with a lot of people not liking me if I think that I'm doing the right thing. And that's, you're definitely going to have to be comfortable with that, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to either not like you or pretend to not like you, or just not want to have anything to do with you because other people don't like you. So it's sort of a minor social pressure, but it's not an actual threat to your job. But then there also are threats. People will stop collaborating with you. Your papers will probably get cited less. Your career will suffer in some ways. my personal feeling was this situation has become important enough that that's a secondary concern. But what I would say is try to get something like this UChicago Free group started, because once there's dozens of people or more, there's some strength in that. They're not going to hound out 50 tenured faculty.
Right.
And then get involved in the Heterodox Academy, FIRE, Academic Freedom Alliance. All these kind of things I think are helpful for networking. Try to get in contact with people just through email.
Yeah.
There's a number of Substacks around this stuff. Just start reading up on the issues and understand them better. And then just, I think, advocate internally, push back when someone says, we don't need another Chinese student. Push back when someone says, we can't hire that guy because he's a male. Just say, that's not a valid reason not to hire someone on our faculty.
Right.
Or even if it's done in a less explicit way, in a more implicit way. Just stay focused on the merit-based criteria when you're in a position to do that. And sometimes that's going to mean you're going to get removed from a committee. And if that happens, just get removed from the committee or not get named on the committee. And I think the important thing is to do it with integrity, forcefully but respectfully. And some people are still just going to call you bad names, and just don't worry about that. But you can do this in a way that you can have a positive impact at your institution.
Right. You're doing good work when you're being criticized by those who don't fight fair.
Well, and also the people who are just confused about these moral issues. Or clearly doing things in a careerist way in order to advance their career, but not what's morally right. And so you just have to be willing to take the insults. And I think it's important not to respond as much as possible. Just let them do their barking and keep doing your thing.
And keep doing your thing. And I like how you just phrased that, because I think we need to make the moral case for merit oftentimes, because too often the debate is presented as being compassionate and pro-DEI versus being, and that's, it's not real compassion, right?
Are you familiar with Fulton Sheen?
No.
Okay, so he was, Bishop Barron?
Yeah.
So he was like the previous Bishop Barron. And, he has a lot of sort of lectures on false compassion. And a false compassion is just a sort of giving people things and going along with whatever they want without thinking about whether it's actually good for them. And I think a false compassion is very dangerous for any institution and for society as a whole. You have to think hard about what's right for someone. That to love is to will the good of the other. It's not to give in to their willful demands on anything. And I think that's an important concept that's underemphasized in modern culture.
I agree. It's really underemphasized. And I'm interested in hearing you talk too, because you're clearly so busy as you're also doing your research. And so I want to switch gears a little bit to learn more about your research and maybe how that's been affected as you've become more vocal.
Yeah, so luckily I have colleagues who still want to work with me.
Good.
And they're great people, and we're having fun doing our projects. I probably have less graduate student applicants, but I don't really mind if I don't have woke students applying to work with me. That's just fine, in my opinion. I still have plenty of great students and colleagues external to the university that I've been collaborating with for a long time, who I've continued to collaborating with. So I have an engaging and vigorous intellectual life still.
Good.
The most interesting thing to me, what I like to do is to play with supercomputers. One of the great things about the University of Chicago is we have a big cluster. They give me 3 million CPU hours on this cluster. So a cluster is like a bunch of connected computers. And then I can run distributed code on it where the calculation gets chunked up, and I can put it on 1,000 different computers, and then it can get recombined. And so 3 million CPU hours is not nothing, but 1 million CPU hours at Amazon is about, on the cloud, is about $50,000. So it's, there's a value to getting $150,000 of computation for free every year. And then what I like to do is big computations and then I try to understand those with simple mathematical models.
Okay.
And so I do that in different areas, different fields. Right now, what I'm most interested in is planetary dynamics.
Okay.
And the reason is I found my grandfather to be a model, to work on things for 5 years or so and bring it to completion and then start something new. And he's still doing that. He's 91.
Wow.
And,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he's,
Okay.
he stayed engaged because of that, because he's always learning something new.
Right.
And so I feel bored sometimes and I pick a new thing. So
Okay.
maybe 3 years ago, I got bored and I heard that the planet Mercury's orbit could destabilize. And I said, oh, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So what I did was I downloaded a planetary dynamics code, which takes the laws of gravity and discretizes them numerically.
Okay.
And then you just sort of integrate them forwards or backwards in time for the planets or some moons or whatever you want to put into the code, and you see what happens. And I downloaded a really nice code that a fellow at the University of Toronto developed, which is a Python wrapper to C code, so you can just sort of, it's easy to run, but it's fast. And started playing with it, even though I didn't really do much planetary dynamics before. And then I took the main textbook in their field, and I spent a year reading through it and doing all the problems.
Wow.
With 2 graduate students.
Okay.
And I got myself to a decent level of understanding, not the level of an expert, but enough that I could participate in the scientific discourse.
Okay.
And then basically I started playing with the Mercury problem. And it turns out that there's a 1% chance that Mercury's orbit destabilizes in the next 5 billion years. And so I worked with some colleagues and we did some it's called rare event sampling techniques.
Okay.
To basically trick the model into calculating a rare event quicker, faster, with less computational resources.
Right.
And we calculated it in the next 2 billion years, the probability is closer to 1 in 10,000 rather than 1 in 100.
Okay.
Okay, so why? Who cares? Well, I mean, mostly it's just fun, and that's what I want to do with my time. But the real reason it's probably potentially important is that these rare event sampling schemes are useful in a wide variety of contexts, and this is a good test problem. It's a good test problem because it's relatively low degrees of freedom, but it's computationally intensive enough that it's not trivial.
Okay.
And so we can work on developing techniques, but it's not as hard as a really fancy model that you would need, like a super computer to do. Right. And so that was fun. And then I did a bunch more calculations because I got more interested just in the physics of the Mercury problem and published stuff on those extra calculations. And then since January, I've been trying to make a mathematical model of the way this planetary dynamics evolves. And we found the other people use a diffusive model, but we used a sub-diffusive model. And so it's just sort of changing how the mean square displacement of a statistic scales with time. Turns out to improve the model a lot. And so that's an example of kind of simple mathematical modeling that's fun for me. And so we got a paper that I just submitted yesterday on that. And so
congrats.
That's the kind of thing that I like to do with my research. And then concurrently, I have students and postdocs who are doing their research on a variety of topics, mostly related right now to extrasolar planets. And so, yeah, I mean, ideally, that's the stuff that I would rather be doing with my time. But I found that the social justice perspective was leaking into and infecting my field and my primary work. And so I felt that I had to devote some fraction of my time to responding to that. The other thing is, since I was married 2.5 years ago and I have a 1.5-year-old baby now, I feel more of an obligation to society, to the future, to try to move society in a direction that's more favorable for human flourishing.
And you had a really powerful line. I'm forgetting what exactly it was when you wrote for Barry Weiss in the Free Press a while back, because I think your wife is from Ukraine, and you talked about the Soviet Union and brought in history and how that also has informed. Yeah,
so I mean, there are some similar, so I would call, some people refer to this current movement as woke,
Yeah.
And, then there's a question of how to define it. So the way I would define it is as an illiberal, authoritarian, identitarian, left-wing ideology. And so the illiberal comes because the goal is to shut down other people's speech rather than to just make your argument and contend with other people's arguments.
Right.
It's similar to the authoritarian, the idea that we set out these rules and no one can deviate from them. So those two definitions are similar. The identitarian is that the focus is exclusively on identity characteristics. So immutable characteristics, things like, are you a man or a woman? Are you black or white or Hindu or whatever, Indian or whatever?
Right.
Those become the main focuses of this movement, and then it sort of has a left-wing ideology related to Marxism. It's a kind of neo-Marxism, and so that's how I would define wokeism. But anyways, so there are some similarities to past collectivisms, such as what was practiced in under socialism in Ukraine and Russia. And so my wife was born in 1989 at the end of socialism, 2 years before it ended, and she was baptized in secret because her mother would have been fired from her job as a teacher if they knew that she was a Christian. And so that's sort of emblematic of how this type of repression and anti-humanism of socialism persisted right to the end of the movement, right, when it was just the burning embers. And so afterwards, she, in the 1990s, there was an economic crisis in that region when Russia defaulted on its debt. And people had trouble even just like staying warm.
Right.
And they burned, her mother brought home the old books and they burned them to stay warm. The books of, Lenin and Stalin.
Yeah,
and so
I didn't
it's very
know
symbolic
that.
of such an utter failure that ultimately can be traced to this error in the socialist conception of humanity and economic systems, that the propaganda was only useful to the people and that they could burn it to stay warm. And so, my wife told me that some of the stuff going on at the university reminded her of what her mother had told her about socialist times. And that was really disturbing to me and was a motivation to me to start speaking publicly, even though there would be costs.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's a historical perspective that too many Americans lack, I think. And so it's so helpful when you articulate it and help inform others, because I think a lot of people are just going along with trends right now, trying to protect themselves. And that would be one of my next questions, would be what your advice is for young students who aspire to be professors someday, who aren't particularly political. They love their research, they love their field, they really just want to do great work and be curious about the world, but they don't want to lie, they don't want to adhere to this illiberalism that's taken over so many of our institutions. Do you have advice for kind of your younger self?
Yeah, it's really hard for a young person.
Yeah.
Because, the people who are into this stuff, they're actively trying to weed those people out.
Right.
They don't want you there. So I guess what I would do if I were 20, I would keep my head down, read Substacks and stuff, but keep my opinions to myself, try to reach out to professors like me, but not try to make public statements. And when you're forced to do stuff like write DI statements to get a job, I would just have ChatGPT write it and send the thing in. And then once you've got tenure, it's kind of a long game, a sleeper cell. Then you can start speaking out. But there are things you can do in the meantime. You can write anonymous articles. I run this Substack, Heterodox STEM, and students submit anonymous articles sometimes. So you can do stuff like that. You can read up. You can listen to podcasts. Just don't talk too openly about it with your peers. Another thing I would recommend is don't hang out too much with other students. So if you're a graduate student and you end up hanging out all the time with woke graduate students, the mind virus might start to infect you. So it's better to just go into work, do your work, and make your friends at church or on your sport, your athletic team you do, or something like that, and treat work as work. I would also recommend for young people, try to get married. I got married way too late. I think that was, it worked out good in the end, but probably it's probably more optimal to be married in your 20s and to have a family. I think you're happier long term. And it takes that intense pressure of work being the only thing and career being the only thing off you a little bit and gives you perspective. That would be my advice to a young person.
And that's not advice you often hear on college campuses. I never felt that we were really allowed to discuss family or values or that sort of thing. At UChicago, it just wasn't on the table. And so I'm interested
with other students or with
other students and in classes. I studied Russian at UChicago, and I remember practicing one day how to use the verbs for getting married, and the professor went around the class and just practiced asking some of the women if they wanted to get married someday, and the women were so upset. They found that to be such an unbelievably offensive question that they were forced to discuss whether or not they wanted to get married because they were so career-oriented that to even suggest that they might someday get married, they found deeply offensive. And so the lesson basically ended. Here we are trying to learn this foreign language, and we're struggling to even have conversations.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a stress-inducing question because it forces you to confront. You might in your mind think, I want to pursue my career aggressively, but I also want to have a family, and you realize that there are at least contexts where those might be in conflict, and so being asked that induces so much stress that you would just prefer to shut down the conversation rather than think about it.
Right. I think
but it is important to think about those things. Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean you shouldn't approach it. No, you don't have to do it all at once. If it's causing a lot of distress to think about something, you don't have to force yourself all the time to think about it, but you should return to it, meditate on it, think of it when you're feeling, mentally stable and ready to confront it. Talk to elder friends about things like that, parents. I think that's all important.
Right. Well, and so what's it been like this summer teaching on science and Christianity at UATX with students from all over the country and in some cases the world? It sounded like you're having very real conversations about a really deep, crucial subject.
Yeah, we're having a great time. The course is about sort of the historical development of science and which theological assumptions of Christianity were important for that. And then also just about is there a conflict? There's sort of a meta-narrative in some circles that there's a deep conflict, almost a myth that science arose through conflict and in opposition to the church, which I think is not really true, although there are some points where there is potential for conflict or actual conflict. Especially with certain versions of Christianity. And so that's what we're exploring with a lot of readings and discussion. And it's been really successful. The students are really engaged, fun, and coming from perspectives ranging from roughly Richard Dawkins to traditional Catholic. And all gradations in between, from agnostic to culturally Christian to liberal Christianity, Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestants, all only among 12 people.
Wow.
And so it's been really fun. Today, our last discussion in the second class today was all about extraterrestrial intelligence. And, what are the theological implications of the potential discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence, not just life, but intelligence.
That's super interesting. And when you end a class like that, have you reached some sort of general agreement?
No. Not even close.
Okay, you're just getting started. Okay.
It's not the sort of thing that I think it's reasonable to expect agreement on.
Right.
People are coming from so many different perspectives, and it's such an unconstrained question. The purpose is just to explore the issues and make sure people become aware of things they might not have thought of before, but not to try to reach an agreement.
And that's maybe my last question for you, is about open-mindedness, because so often in school we're told that the goal is to be open-minded, or it's to be uncertain about everything. And something you just said resonated with me, because here you're bringing students together who vehemently disagree, but do so civilly, it sounds like, and they don't exit the classroom having given up their principles per se, but ideally they've expanded their knowledge, they've become more thoughtful on the subject. So what's your thought on open-mindedness and that kind of rhetoric that we hear so often?
Well, I think the open-minded rhetoric is disingenuous, because it's often used to constrain the way people think about things. Like, we have to be open-minded, therefore we can't consider that perspective.
Right.
So that's not very useful, in my opinion. But in this class, I think, people are coming at it with a pretty open mind, listening to the other people. I mean, like, Aquinas would have been in dialogue with Jewish rabbis and Islamic scholars, but all of them weren't necessarily thinking they were going to convert the other guy, but the other person might have interesting perspectives that they hadn't thought of and things like that. There's definitely some students who are in a searching mode, where they're trying to figure out what they think about all this stuff, and other ones who have more settled and are less likely to be moved. They feel comfortable with they've thought about a lot of these issues and they're comfortable with their position, but they find it engaging to talk about and learn more. And there's others who I feel like they're trying to figure out what they believe and where they're going to go in their life. So it's been fun.
Good. And actually, one more quickly, because you are so busy and you're here in Dallas teaching at UATX. So you're trying to salvage higher education while also helping us build anew. I wonder if you can say something briefly about UATX and kind of your thoughts on our project.
Well, my experience at UATX has been very positive. I'm on the board of advisors. I participated in the forbidden courses last year. I taught a course on global warming. And then last fall, I consulted with UATX to help Dean Ruth of the science. I guess what's his domain called? Is it STEM or
he's the director of STEM?
Okay,
at
director
UATX.
of STEM. Yeah. So I helped him develop a science curriculum, or a physical science curriculum, that was focused on applied math, statistics, and computer science, just as a starting point. It's hard to get started with a bunch of lab sciences. And that was necessary to get approval from the state. I guess it's not accreditation. It's like the first step that you need to even have students.
It's the first of many.
You've got to graduate students to be accredited, so that's a while off. But so I did that, and then I'm doing this summer. There's been this planning meeting in the spring last year and in the spring this year that I came to. What I've liked about it is you guys pay me, which is nice. So I get a little extra money for my family. That's my wife's main motivation.
Nice.
She says, "Are they paying you? Okay, you can go." But I like meeting with the students, especially at the forbidden courses. That's where I met students, really engaging students, fun to have lunch with and just talk to about anything. I find the students at UChicago are actually also pretty engaging. There's a lot of, so at any university, there's a range of students. Some of them are like, I'm not going to name any particular majors or whatever, but there's some students who are much more obsessed with just like getting the good grades so they can get on to the next thing.
Right.
And they're not all, that's great. Like, we need doctors and stuff. I have no problem with that. But it's maybe a little less interesting for me. From a selfish perspective. But there are plenty of students at UChicago who just want to learn about different things and come to my office hours and talk, and it's fun. The students that I work with on research are usually like that. We have a great time. But the students that have been coming to the forbidden courses are basically only in that category, where they just want to learn and talk about stuff. Like, there's no grades, there's no reason for them to be here. It's about the most miserable place to be on Earth. We're in terrible air conditioning. I got this cough from recirculated, dry, air-conditioned air. It's miserable. You step outside and you just want to die. And then they come here
horrible,
and it's like 12 hours a day of intense intellectual activity. And so it's a very particular young person who thinks, oh, that sounds like a great vacation. Like, that's what I'm going to do during my week off.
Right.
So that's fun.
Right.
And then the other faculty who have been here and also at these organizing meetings, I've met dozens of really interesting people, got to hear their perspective and things like that. So for me, it's been a very positive experience. And I think hopefully it will be for a lot of future faculty and students.
Good. Yeah, I hope so. I hope you return for a third summer of AC.
Yeah, I have an idea.
So,
I have an idea.
Yeah.
Of population collapse.
Okay.
So last year I had some low-level mathematical component to my course.
Okay.
And this year there isn't a single course that has any mathematical or computational component.
Okay.
And so I've given a proposal that we'll see if they like, if they have the forbidden courses again, if they want me back, which is population collapse.
Okay.
And so basically every day I would introduce new components of a population model, which would be based on ordinary differential equations, and then the students would code them up. And then you could use that it'd be a simple model that you could explore different things about population growth, population collapse, different subpopulations with different fertility and death rates, growing and collapsing and equilibrating at different values.
Right.
And then you could download data on from different countries which are still growing or which have experienced collapse, like Korea, in the fertility rate, like Korea or Japan. And you can fit them to the model. So it would involve a statistical component, but it would all be Python based. And so it would be, the prerequisite would be an ability to code in Python.
Wow.
And it seems like it might be a fun course for sort of a more tech nerdy types.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you'll have to keep pitching that to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And what makes it forbidden is that it's, nobody's really talking about population collapse.
Right.
A lot of people are still in the mode of limits to growth, that our biggest problem is controlling fertility, not enhancing fertility.
Right.
And the other thing that makes it forbidden is talking about fertility is a bit taboo related to this issue that you mentioned with students not wanting to talk about marriage.
Yeah.
Because the accusation that sometimes comes from feminists is that it's a way to try to control women's bodies to talk about fertility. And so that's what
to even
would make
discuss it.
To even discuss it. And so that's what would make it have a sort of a forbidden flavor. But from my perspective, it's more of a technical problem. Studying how this has happened, building mathematical models, and then thinking about what solutions might there be to allow a society that continues to flourish rather than just collapsing into nothingness and nihilism.
Just a key
Yeah.
question.
Well, it seems important to me.
Yeah, really, really important. I can't code, but if you have the class next year, I'll sit in on it.
Great.
Yeah, awesome.
You can learn to code.
Yeah, exactly. I have time, maybe, in the next year.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.